In the latest shocking geopolitical move, foreign firms are fleeing China as fast as they can. We're witnessing the end of the world's factory before our eyes. Find out more. China enjoyed its position as the world's factory for 4 long decades. In the 1990s, as globalization gained momentum, the Western public became aware of a novel idea: offshoring. And China was the ideal market and producer combo due to its skilled workforce and expanding middle class, which was eager to purchase Western goods. How much of a change a few decades can make, right? Currently, businesses are attempting to relocate their production to safe havens where they won't have to worry about being caught in a geopolitical conflict. Yes, some jobs were eliminated by automation, but a large number of others were exported to low-wage nations. In fact, American multinational corporations had 30% of their workforce operating abroad in 1982. The percentage doubled to 60% in 2014. None of these foreign locations had more popularity than China, a developing nation with the world's factory thanks to its workforce's high levels of basic literacy and infrastructure. Given that American industrial workers earning $20 per hour or more could be replaced by workers earning less than $1 per hour, outsourcing to China was financially necessary for firms. Now, businesses will continue to run their activities in the places where doing so makes the most financial sense. Offshoring is a trend that won't go away, but that doesn't mean Chinese manufacturing will still enjoy the perks it once did. According to a study by the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, 50% of Western companies claimed that business in the country had gotten more politicized in 2021 than it had in previous years, and 23% of them said that they were considering relocating their activities out of the nation. Let's not forget that the pandemic and its pressures are another factor in this. The zero-COVID policy in China disrupted supply lines and imprisoned manufacturing workers in their dormitories. The lockdowns, which continued well into 2022, coupled with the country's political situation, were the final blow. Businesses had had enough of China. In came friendshoring. It's exactly what it sounds like. Relocating business operations to friendly nations, whether it's for manufacturing, back office, R&D, or any other area of expertise. Executives were concerned that they'd end up on the wrong side of a global battle, given Beijing's increased hostilities toward the West and its emphasis on maintaining connections with Moscow. A lot of the companies found that it was getting harder and harder to comply with the CCP's ideology. So, a majority of those shifted to friendshoring, taking their businesses outside of China. Of course, the idea of friendly countries was foreign to the majority of business leaders until quite recently. Geopolitically speaking, there are no friendly or hostile nations for the post-Cold War generation currently in charge of Western corporations. Instead, there are only various markets, some of which are more difficult to operate in due to corruption, violence, or other disasters. These entrepreneurs don't see their businesses as ambassadors for the nation in which they are situated. It's just what makes sense ethically and financially. For instance, the production of Apple's AirPods Pro 2 is now expected to move from China to Vietnam. Samsung relocated its Chinese manufacturing to Vietnam 2 years ago, and Hasbro has relocated its Chinese manufacturing to Vietnam and India. What's more, despite being run by China's Geely, Volvo announced that it would open its first manufacturing plant in Europe in 60 years, in Slovakia. Even giant manufacturers of clothing and footwear, including Adidas, have moved their operations to Vietnam. That spells trouble for China. It's plain to see. These events have served as a timely reminder that a firm is at risk of suffering significant losses or perhaps bankruptcy when it has too much exposure to any one nation. This degree of supply chain restructuring may not have been caused by geopolitical tensions in and of itself, but COVID added that extra fuel to the fire. And the impacts of the trade conflict are still being felt. The increased tariffs Trump imposed on China have not been stopped by President Joe Biden. In fact, he implemented export limits on the shipment of equipment to Chinese-owned manufacturers producing advanced logic circuits. This made an already difficult relationship even worse. Now, multinational corporations are attempting to mitigate their business risks more than ever as a result of the complex web of U.S.-China trade tensions. The Chinese joint venture partner of Stellantis accused the Dutch automaker of lack of respect for customers in the Chinese automobile market. The accusation, which came when Stellantis decided to shut down a plant in China due to interference by government authorities, is similar to those made by boycotts by Chinese consumers. Because of these tensions, Willis Towers Watson conducted a political risk poll this year and discovered that 95% of multinational corporations are now concerned about the danger of conducting business in the Indo-Pacific, which is really China. Just 2 years ago, when tensions were already high, that number was at 62%. The vast majority of respondents thought that geostrategic competition and the economic decoupling of China and the West would continue to worsen in the future. Most respondents were concerned about private corporations being the target of foreign diplomatic issues. Comparatively speaking, only 57% of businesses are worried about the risk of conducting business in Europe. Their concerns about conducting business in China have grown as a result of Beijing's persistence on its zero-COVID goal, which continues to disrupt logistics and production. Now, despite polls and statements from business advocacy groups and experts in the country that imply otherwise, China is seeing an exodus of foreign companies. Plus, the rate at which businesses are departing China is quickening, creating a ripple effect that endangers the post-COVID-19 economic recovery for the country. The exodus also poses a challenge to President Xi Jinping's dual circulation policies, which seek to increase domestic consumption in order to lessen China's reliance on overseas markets. And as Chinese authorities are rushing to slow down the domino effect, they're failing. Recent reports indicate that manufacturers from the more highly invested countries such as Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are departing China in large numbers. Despite this exodus being rarely acknowledged publicly by the government, it's working to retain these foreign direct investments. The Chinese central government is intensifying efforts to entice businesses back, with a special focus on managing the effects of output that is on its way out of the country. At least 60% of local businesses, including smaller factories, stores, and restaurants, have been forced to close since South Korean company Samsung shut down its smartphone production in Weizhou in Guangdong province in 2019. The Weizhou facility of Samsung has been in operation since 1992, and the city expanded along with the business. All of these things depended on the growth of Samsung's company, including jobs for locals at the Samsung factory, housing for its employees, restaurants, and smaller industries constructed by local Chinese suppliers. But when Samsung closed its plant, they quickly came to an end. To the west of Weizhou in Dongguan, the nearby town of Chenggong was also affected by the ripples. The town's small manufacturers, which depended on large orders from Samsung, suffered significant losses as a result of the shutdown, forcing thousands of employees and executives to take time off or be laid off, which had a negative impact on the local economy. With this in mind, the Chinese government is frantically trying to halt the outflow of foreign manufacturers in order to lessen its consequences on China's post-COVID-19 economic recovery, which has been hampered by rising unemployment, particularly among recent graduates, and diminishing domestic demand. The Communist Party members in charge of the cities with huge concentrations of such companies are concerned about the mass exit, where more than 1,700 firms and factories with investments from Japan have pulled out stakes. According to sources, authorities in Guangdong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang were pleading with the Asian neighbor, which at the time was China's third largest source of foreign direct investment, not to withdraw its enterprises in huge numbers. Authorities have implemented significant incentives to keep Japanese companies in the country, including tax breaks, requirements that local officials purchase Japanese automobiles, and the promise of fiscal support for the construction of a new electric and hybrid vehicle plant by one company. You see, the local government would lose face if Japanese businesses withdrew. Just how fast geopolitics can upend the status quo in international business is a huge lesson that China is learning. And despite the fact that Chinese state media strongly refutes and greatly downplays stories that international companies are leaving, Chinese officials' actions contradict these claims. Let us know in the comments below what you think China will do to retain its status as the world's factory. And we'll see you in the next video.